The zipper stopped halfway up her back, and at that exact moment, the most powerful woman in the city realized she had no one left to call. Outside the bridal suite, hundreds of guests were waiting for the wedding of the year. Inside, the CEO of a billion-dollar company stood trembling in a white wedding dress, staring at her reflection as tears quietly gathered in her eyes. Her assistant was stuck in traffic, her bridesmaids had disappeared into the ballroom, and the only person nearby was the quiet single father who had spent the morning fixing a broken delivery cart. When she finally turned to him and whispered, "Could you help me?" He stepped closer, looked at the stubborn zipper, and calmly asked, "Up or down?" Neither of them knew that those 3 words would change both of their lives forever. Daniel Carter was 36 years old and had learned to live without expecting life to be fair. 3 years earlier, his wife had died suddenly after a short illness, leaving him alone with his 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Daniel had once dreamed of becoming an architect, but dreams became luxuries when there were school bills, rent, groceries, and a child who still woke from nightmares asking for her mother. He eventually took a job at a luxury hotel where he worked maintenance and deliveries. He was dependable, polite, and almost invisible. Most people never noticed the man carrying boxes through the corridors, but Daniel had stopped caring about being noticed. His only goal was to give Lily a safe childhood. That morning, the hotel was overflowing with flowers, photographers, musicians, and wealthy guests. The wedding belonged to Victoria Bennett, the 34-year-old CEO of Bennett Global, a woman famous for turning a struggling company into an international empire. Newspapers called her brilliant, fearless, and impossible to impress. But behind the headlines was a woman who had spent most of her life believing that love was something she could control if she worked hard enough. Her fiancé, Richard, came from another wealthy family, and their wedding had been planned like a corporate merger. Every detail was perfect. The flowers were imported, the orchestra had rehearsed for weeks, and the guest list included politicians, celebrities, investors, and business leaders. Yet while everyone admired the perfection, Victoria stood alone in the bridal suite, wondering why her heart felt so empty. Then the zipper broke. Her assistant tried to fix it, but the tiny mechanism jammed completely. The bridesmaids were downstairs preparing for photographs, and the wedding planner was dealing with an emergency involving the caterer. Victoria looked at the clock. 20 minutes remained before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. She tried again, but the zipper refused to move. Then came a knock. Daniel entered carrying a small toolbox. He had been called to repair a cabinet in the adjoining room. When he saw Victoria standing helplessly in front of the mirror, he immediately stopped and looked away respectfully. She explained what had happened, and although embarrassment colored her face, she asked if he knew how to fix zippers. Daniel smiled gently and said he had repaired almost everything at the hotel except broken hearts. Victoria almost laughed, and for the first time that day, the pressure in her chest loosened. He carefully examined the zipper and realized it wasn't broken. The fabric had caught inside the mechanism. He asked her to remain still while he worked. Then, remembering her earlier question, he asked, "Up or down?" She answered softly, "Up." His hands were careful and professional as he freed the fabric and slowly pulled the zipper into place. When it finally closed, Victoria stared at herself in the mirror. The dress looked perfect, but Daniel noticed something else. Her eyes didn't. He stepped back and told her she was ready. Victoria looked at him through the mirror and asked why he wasn't impressed by the wedding, the dress, or the entire spectacle surrounding her. Daniel simply said that sometimes beautiful things could still make a person unhappy. The words struck her harder than he intended. Victoria asked how he could know anything about unhappiness. Daniel hesitated before telling her about Lily and the woman he had lost. He didn't describe the details. He simply said that after losing his wife, he discovered that life wasn't about keeping everything perfect. It was about finding reasons to keep going when everything stopped making sense. Victoria turned away, suddenly fighting tears. She had spent years building a company because she believed success could protect her from pain. She had convinced herself that marrying Richard was the logical next step. Their families understood each other. Their businesses complemented each other, and everyone approved. But somewhere between negotiations, contracts, and public appearances, she had forgotten to ask herself one simple question. Was she happy? Daniel didn't tell her what to do. He only reminded her that she deserved to answer that question honestly. Then the door opened. Richard stood there. His expression changed when he saw Daniel beside Victoria. He immediately assumed the worst. He accused Daniel of crossing boundaries and demanded to know why a hotel worker was alone with his bride. Victoria tried to explain, but Richard's anger only grew. Daniel quietly apologized and prepared to leave, refusing to create a scene. But Victoria stopped him. For the first time that day, she didn't care about the guests, the cameras, or what anyone might think. She told Richard exactly what had happened. Then she told him something even more difficult. She wasn't going to marry him. Silence filled the room. Richard stared at her as if she had spoken another language. He reminded her of the contracts, the families, the guests, the embarrassment, and the millions already spent. Victoria listened, then calmly said that she would rather disappoint a ballroom full of people than spend the rest of her life disappointing herself. Daniel quietly walked away before anyone could notice the tears in his own eyes. The wedding was canceled. By evening, the story was everywhere. Some people called Victoria reckless. Others called her selfish. Business commentators questioned whether she could remain CEO after making such a dramatic personal decision. Victoria ignored all of it. The next morning, she returned to the hotel. She wasn't wearing designer clothes. She wasn't surrounded by assistants. She carried a small box of pastries and walked directly to the maintenance department. Daniel looked stunned when he saw her. Victoria told him she hadn't come to thank him for fixing her dress. She had come to thank him for reminding her that a life could look perfect from the outside and still be completely wrong on the inside. Then she handed him the box. Inside was a handwritten note for Lily. Victoria had learned from the hotel records that Daniel's daughter loved drawing. She had arranged for a scholarship program at a local art school to cover Lily's classes, not as charity, but because she believed talent deserved a chance. Daniel stared at the note, overwhelmed. He told Victoria he couldn't accept such a gift. She smiled and said it wasn't a gift. It was an opportunity. Months passed. Victoria began changing the culture of her company, creating family support programs for employees and funding scholarships for children who had lost parents. Daniel remained at the hotel for a while, but Victoria eventually helped him reconnect with his old dream. With her support and his own determination, he began studying architecture at night. Their relationship didn't become a fairy tale overnight. It began with friendship, then trust, then countless conversations over coffee while Lily colored pictures at the table. Victoria discovered that Daniel never treated her like a billionaire. Daniel discovered that Victoria's confidence hit a woman who was still learning how to be vulnerable. Lily, meanwhile, decided Victoria needed to learn how to make pancakes properly. 1 year after the canceled wedding, Victoria stood outside a small community center designed by Daniel. It was his first major architectural project, built for children who needed a safe place to learn and create. Lily pulled Victoria toward a wall covered with children's drawings. At the center was a picture of 3 people holding hands. Underneath, Lily had written, "Family is who stays." Victoria looked at Daniel. He didn't need to say anything. They both understood. Sometimes the person who changes your life doesn't arrive with a grand entrance. Sometimes they appear carrying a toolbox, wearing a simple uniform, and asking one ordinary question at exactly the right moment. And sometimes a broken zipper isn't really a problem. Sometimes it's the tiny interruption that gives a person enough time to realize they were about to walk into the wrong life. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Bright Acts. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. And before we end, comment, "Everyone deserves a second chance," if you believe that kindness can change a person's entire future. Because Daniel didn't save Victoria from a broken dress. He helped her save herself from a life that wasn't truly hers. And in doing so, he finally found the courage to rebuild his own.